Ergo Dei genitrix, quem totus non capitor is, in tua seclaus mirt, viscera factus homo.
Let us listen today the conference of Father Stefano Maria Manelli, the founder of the family of Franciscan of Immaculate, who, for health reasons, was unable to participate in person at this symposium, but he is present in spirit. We thank him all the same for his valuable contribution. His conference summarizes the entire message of Fatima and shows how much Our Lady's heartfelt requests are being disregarded in our day. Let us listen attentively, Father Stefano Manelli, through the voice of Father Antonio Maria, a young priest originally from Singapore, and following the example of St. Francis, let each one of us ask in his heart, Immaculate Mother, what do you want me to do? Please, Father Antonio.
Ave Maria. Fatima and the Immaculate Heart of Mary, by Father Stefano Maria Manelli. On reflection, we can and must immediately say that the most precious thing about the Fatima event was undoubtedly the gift of devotion to the Immaculate Heart, of she who is the Mother of God and our Mother, the universal mediatrix of salvation and grace. Fatima was for this reason described in Father Gabriele Roschini's words, the most stupendous revelation of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. It is a heart entirely enveloped in the flames of love of her twofold motherhood, a natural motherhood towards God and a spiritual one towards men. It is precisely the Immaculate Heart of Mary that in a very significant way appeared to the three shepherd children, surrounded by the most painful thorns of mediation and co-redemption, which Our Lady wished to suffer most lovingly for our salvation, in the closest and most indissoluble union with her Son Jesus, our crucified Redeemer. Jesus himself, moreover, manifested his desire that the Immaculate Heart of Mary be known, loved, and venerated throughout the world to save souls from hell. And indeed, it is the Immaculate Heart of the Divine Mother that will intervene and work in a way that is completely inscrutable to us, to prevent the ruin of materialistic humanity gone mad behind the false idols of Satan's kingdom, which is obscuring the minds and hearts of men and reigning over the earth, especially in two ways. The first, with the satanic culture of death, laws on abortion, the killing of embryos, contraception, euthanasia, wars, terrorism. Secondly, with mass atheism, false ecumenism, the most monstrous, rampant corruption, and with the spiraling scandals and inequalities of a global scale. It would be good to focus our attention and engage our deepest reflection on this Fatima event that for more than 90 years has occupied the 20th and now 21st century. Mind and heart, intelligence and will must grasp the rich heritage of content that Fatima has brought and continues to bring with it for our good, for our pilgrimage from this earth to heaven. Our correspondence. Certainly, it has been well written that the Fatima event presents us with a message of universal appeal. which can be understood in a positive or negative sense, depending on the response of men to the requests God makes through His Divine Mother. That is to say, depending on the faithful correspondence of men of goodwill or the foolish unresponsiveness of those who want to be men without goodwill. For this reason, the author Borelli was able to write an entire book on Fatima with a provocative yet significantly questioning subtitle, Fatima, Message of Tragedy or of Hope? Tragedy or hope? In reality, it depends solely on our response. It is very clear that if indeed there is our faithful correspondence, Our Lady will save us again and again. She has done so in the past. She will do so again today, in this atomic age. But it is also certain that Our Lady will not work alone. Without our voluntary participation as free and intelligent people who commit themselves to correspond to her maternal invitations. Already in the 1950s, with great insight, Father Giovanni Barra analyzed the grave and completely precarious world situation in the light of the Fatima event, noting that it was similar to a very dangerous powder keg, ready to explode at any moment. He wrote that today, atomic man has imprisoned solar energy to make a deadly weapon with which to destroy humanity. Our Lady, with the miracle of the sun at Fatima, shows that she wants to take that same solar energy and make it an instrument of peace. Of course, this salvation does not work on inanimate nature. It is achieved on animate and intelligent nature, which is man. It therefore presupposes the cooperation of the human creature in this work of salvation. This is why, already in the apparitions of La Salette and Lourdes, Our Lady asked for penance. 3 times she says to Bernadette, penance, penance, penance. At Fatima, Our Lady makes the same appeal. The atom will not destroy man if man does not destroy himself with the atom. But who thinks in this manner today? With so many nations, large and small alike, declaring their deadly array of weapons and atomic bombs at their disposal, the revelation of the 3rd part of the Secret of Fatima fully confirms the value of the message of penance, expressed by the triple cry of the angel, repeating in a loud voice, penance, penance, penance. After Our Lady's motherly hand had stopped that sword of fire, which was supposed to set the whole world on fire. If the fiery avalanche of the flaming sword was meant to signify a bomb or nuclear war, what stops it is the hand of the powerful Mother Mediatrix, united, however, to that threefold cry of the angel, who forcefully imposes on all men salvation through penance. But if men do not do penance, what will happen? What will be the consequence of our failure to respond? An author, Cinetti, writes, I quote, "What is certain is that the 3rd secret appears as a tragic, and one might even say apocalyptic vision, which nevertheless opens hearts to holy hope. For," and she quotes the 3rd secret, writes, "Beneath the 2 arms of the cross were 2 angels, each with a crystal watering can in his hand, in which they collected the blood of the martyrs, and with it watered the souls that approached God. She continues, from the blood of the martyrs, Christian civilization, which is the only truly human civilization, was born and can be renewed. It is also the kingdom of Mary, of which many saints have spoken of, such as Saint Louis Marie Grignon de Montfort and Saint Maximilian Kolbe, and above all, Our Lady herself, announced by the words, "In the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph." This final triumph, however, is the fruit of the suffering and blood of the martyrs, destined to purify and renew the Church and society. End quote. Regarding the necessity of penance, it is interesting to read what the well-known Mariologist Laurentin wrote, clearly expressing a pessimistic prediction about the content of the third part of the Secret of Fatima. I quote, "The important point of the message of Fatima is contained, in my opinion, in the triple appeal, penance, penance, penance. According to the Bible, conversion means to return to God. The fact is, today's world no longer thinks of God. It is totally secularized. Modern man sees many things, but can no longer see God. Dominated as it is by rules that contravene God's law, our society is not so much exposed to the threat of punishment from above as to the concrete danger of self-destruction." End quote. A punishment from above or self-destruction, these have been given and are still given as consequences to man's failure to correspond to the warnings contained in the third part of the Secret of Fatima. According to a careful and meditated reading that cannot be disregarded or rejected by anyone of the text, bearing in mind the symbolic and apocalyptic character of the content of the secret, which involves a corresponding interpretation known as recapitulative or concentric evolution specific to the book of the Apocalypse. In the text of the third part of the Secret of Fatima, we can see this type of interpretation in a threefold projection, characteristic of the prophetic and apocalyptic genre, which unfolds and recapitulates the past, present, and future. Thus, certain events that took place in the past are then found again in the present and develop or extend into the future without any fixed timetable. Cardinal Sodano also explained in his presentation at Fatima on the 13th of May, year 2000, that in the third part of the Secret of Fatima, there is, quote, "a vision comparable to those of sacred scripture, which does not describe in a photographic sense the details of future events, but synthesize and condense on the same background events that unfold over time in an unspecified succession and duration." End quote. This scriptural interpretation is characteristic of the theology of history, which seeks to understand all human and earthly events through the lens of faith, in lumine fidei, discerning their transcendent thread that is woven not by time and space, but in reference to God. An example of this is given by St. John the Evangelist, who presents the Apocalypse in an eschatological perspective, speaking of the last days, which, however, have already begun with the historical coming of Christ 2,000 years ago. In analogy with the Apocalypse, which means revelation, it can be said that the revelation contained in the entire Secret of Fatima presents the reality of a constant opposition between heaven and hell. It is the endless struggle on earth. Moreover, we can see in today's world the invasion of the darkness of error against the truth, of heresies against the faith, of corruption against morals, revolting, freewheeling pansexualism, social inequalities, exploitation, and theft, of the culture of death against life, abortion, contraception, euthanasia, terrorism, endemic wars. And it is clear to everyone that values such as the family, marriage, education, women, youth, etc., are in ruin, with painful losses for the church and for the people of God. Namely, a frightening decline in vocations, the closure of seminaries, monasteries, and convents, the abandonment of numerous missions in pagan lands, the abandonment of the frequent reception of the sacraments, and participation in Holy Mass on feast days, which has plummeted from 80% to 5%. The loss of the daily recitation of millions of rosaries in families. Where will we end up at this rate? What will happen if men do not practice penance, 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 proclaimed by the angel pointing that destructive flaming sword at the earth, which remained held back only because it was stopped by the hand of our mother and powerful mediatrix? But will that flaming sword remain impeded forever? The current situation, therefore, cannot but be tremendously critical for us. And indeed, it may seem evident that the vision of the third part of the Secret of Fatima seems to be coming true today more than ever. If we continue not to respond to the triple request for penance, will the hand of the motherly mediatrix still stop the launch of that avalanche of flaming fire? How can we awaken all the people of this poor world in danger so that they finally realize the terrifying gravity of the situation of our days? Quite rightly, it has been written that at present, man is sitting on the crater of a volcano. Yet foolishly, he does not want to realize it. He does not want to pay attention to it or think about it. And therefore, he tries to distract himself with the small satisfactions of everyday life. He takes interest in football matches. He wastes hours and hours in front of the television. He makes plans for his holidays and watches with fascination the unreal cars racing on the circuits. Women follow fashion and vain vanities, while young people are easy prey to drugs, pornography, and violence. Few think about God and the great whys of human destiny. Few return to God and think about the brevity of life. What can we do then? At this point, we propose the grace of the Immaculate Heart of Mary, which is the way to salvation, rooted in conversion, communion with God in prayer, and in particular the meditated rosary, and above all, in devotion and consecration to the Immaculate Heart. If the Fatima event is a great act of Marian grace that expresses all the maternal concern of Our Lady for her children journeying on this earth, amid dangers and tribulations of all kinds, what can be said to be the most genuine, original expression of Our Lady's motherhood in coming to the aid of her children in need, to snatch them from the danger of perdition and to assure them of salvation? To save souls from perdition, here are the holy words of Our Lady. God wishes to establish in the world devotion to my Immaculate Heart. In these few words contain our path to salvation, that is, the Via Matris, or rather, the Via Cordis Matris. That the entire Fatima event continues to present to us in its nature and workings since the 13th of May, 1917. And what other way could be sweeter, more intimate and precious than this via cordis matris? Was this not the way Jesus took to come and save us? Through the universal redemption accomplished in his indissoluble union with our Divine Mother, the co-redemptrix, whose heart was pierced by the sword of the passion and death of her Son, the crucified Redeemer, for our sakes. Our Lady herself, in fact, deigned with maternal concern to show us the most effective means of avoiding both temporal punishments, war with all its horrible consequences, and more especially eternal punishments, hell, shown to the 3 terrified children, urging them to reparation. These means are narrowed down to 2. Prayer, especially the Rosary, combined with sacrifice, and devotion to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. The truly admirable example was that of the little shepherds, with their unconditional correspondence and their immeasurable generosity in praying, especially the Rosary, and in sacrificing themselves in all kinds of ways, even the most ingenuous, fasting, bearing with thirst, tying a rope around their waist, beating their legs with nettles. Their correspondence can and must be a true school for everyone. Do we not want to correspond too? We must do so, remembering the painful words of the Immaculate Heart. Many, many will go to hell because there is no one to sacrifice themselves and pray for them. It is precisely in these little shepherds that we can discover the most genuine substance of the true triumph of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. It is in their active spiritual progress and in their concrete interior transfiguration wrought by Our Lady. It is to this interior transfiguration, apart from the many other benefits that the period of peace linked to the triumph of the Immaculate Heart will bring, that we are called and which we should all generously commit ourselves to. Development of the grace of Fatima. At this point, in order to grasp the doctrinal and theological knowledge of the mystery of Fatima, we want to reflect in particular on its contribution to the theological truth of Marian mediation in all its operative breadth as co-redemptive, salvific mediation and dispensative mediation of all graces. This is a high-profile Marian theme, exquisitely theological, both speculative and spiritual. It is a theme that is engaging the Areopagus of Marian theology, rich in studies and research at the highest level of publications, collections, and international theological symposia in support of Marian soteriology, as seen from the references contained in the various in-depth contributions and research findings that follow. The starting point for these studies is always the Fatima event, understood in its most doctrinal and spiritual dimension, albeit with due and important references to other relevant content, including the paranetic and pastoral. An expert on the Fatima event, Sister Lucia dos Santos, who passed away in 2005 at the venerable age of 97, cannot but be considered the most famous and important seer of Fatima. It is from her Marian teaching, that the series of research and in-depth studies on Marian soteriology according to the Fatima event begins. It is she who champions the truth of Marian co-redemption, speaking openly and clearly about it, explicitly and repeatedly calling Our Lady by the specific title of co-redemptrix. This is followed by 2 further contributions of theological analysis, one addressing mediation and co-redemption, and the other redemption and co-redemption, both closely related to the more doctrinal dimensions of the message of Fatima and the unfolding of the Fatima event. Lastly, there is a final contribution offering an overall assessment of the Fatima event in relation to the numerous expressive and significant signs of Marian mediation, the signs that have punctuated and greatly enriched the most significant contents of the Fatima event. The Mystery of Mary Co-Redemptrix in the last book written by Sister Lucia of Fatima. The last book written by Sister Lucia of Fatima, titled Calls from the Message of Fatima, contains many beautiful and precious things. The book was quickly and widely distributed throughout the world. Father Jesus Castellano Cevera, consultant to the Congregation of the Doctrine of Faith, defined the book in his preface as, I quote, "in a sense, the spiritual testament of the 94-year-old visionary of Fatima, a spiritual testament so rich and comforting that one's heart expands, and with its great simplicity and openness, harmoniously blended with the words of the gospel, so that the book contains and transmits a kind of message of Fatima according to the gospel, or a gospel according to Fatima," end quote. It was the Supreme Pontiff, St. John Paul II himself, who assured us of this, stating that the whole world has accepted and made her own the Marian message of Fatima, saying, "Above all, because it contains a truth and a summons which are in essence the truth and the summons of the gospel itself." Now, for this reason, we can safely assume that the calls from the message of Fatima, written in their entire doctrinal and charismatic content, are wholly in relation to the absolute and authorized truth of revelation, as we read again in the preface. Catechism for all. Another no less valuable characteristic of the book is the very useful catechetical style with which the calls are presented by Sister Lucia, so that they rightly constitute a sort of catechism of Fatima, or better still, a true text of the catechism of the Christian life according to Fatima, as Father Cevera expresses it. The content of the calls is divided into 4 parts. The first part contains a catechesis of a mainly historical nature, with a description of the exceptional events that took place in that strip of Portuguese land, with the typical geographical, family, and social context of the time in which the 3 little shepherds, Lucia, Francisco, and Jacinta, lived. These pages are quick descriptions necessary to understand the historical and charismatic reality of the extraordinary events of Fatima. The second part of the book is a true doctrinal catechesis according to the Christian faith. It is a long catechesis which gradually ranges from the supreme mysteries of the faith, the Holy Trinity, the Eucharist, Our Lady, the Church, eschatology, the theological virtues, the life of prayer, the Christian family, consecrated life, and the sanctification of all according to God's will. In these clear pages of catechesis, the theology and spirituality of Fatima intertwine and combine in a continuity of teaching and instruction with such effective and practical explanations that they radiate rather than present or discuss the perennial truths of our faith, the soul of the truest and most genuine Christian life. The third part of the book is a clear catechesis on the moral life, lived according to the primary code of the Ten Commandments, which is written in the heart of every person, and is the divine law for any given society and for the whole of humanity. And finally, in the fourth part of the book, it contains Sister Lucia's catechesis on the spiritual life, centered on prayer, and particularly on the Marian prayer most closely linked to the message of Fatima, namely the Holy Rosary. Our Lady expressly mentioned it at every apparition, recommending each time that the Rosary be recited faithfully every day. With regard to the Holy Rosary, as a contemplative and catechist, Sister Lucia also gave us her personal reflections on each of the joyful, sorrowful, and glorious mysteries, dwelling briefly on some, longer on others, and most significantly on that of our Lord's resurrection, previewing the happiest goal of the Christian life in this land of exile, that is, the goal of eternal resurrection. A short treatise on spirituality. With a very apt expression, Sister Lucia's book has been defined also as a spiritual treatise. Nothing different and nothing better could be expected from a contemplative. Sister Lucia did not arm herself with studies or doctrinal research. She does not attempt to be a theologian, much less a professor. She never loses her vigilant awareness of her limited abilities, so she can sincerely and simply say that she has written, and these are her words, within the limits imposed by my humble ignorance and poverty. She, therefore, always remains the catechist who knows how to draw almost everything wisely, not so much from books or texts, but from devout prayer and meditation, contemplation, and lived experience. It can truly be said of her that before writing, she listened to and treasured the words of the Lord, meditating them in her heart, in imitation of the Blessed Virgin. A striking feature, then, is the very fabric of the book. In the presence of a lively and active sensus fidei, according to the classical doctrine of the Church, sensus fidei, quote, is a supernatural connaturality stemming simultaneously from the presence of the Holy Spirit in the Church and from the internalization of the Church's teaching. End quote. And the Second Vatican Council explains that, quote, discernment in matters of faith is aroused and sustained by the Spirit of truth. It is exercised under the guidance of the sacred teaching authority, in faithful and respectful obedience to which the people of God accepts that which is not just the word of men, but truly the word of God. Through it, the people of God adheres unwaveringly to the faith given once and for all to the saints, penetrates it more deeply with right thinking, and applies it more fully in its life. End quote, from Lumen Gentium 12. One could say that on every page of Sister Lucia's book, the presence of a transparent and lively sensus fidei is easily discerned, a sensus fidei with an evangelical tone, simple and easy in style, but profound and rich in truths that resonate clearly in the soul. Truths of faith that have a sense of permanence because it is the faith of the Church of all times, the faith of the martyrs, the faith of the saints, the faith that can never fail. This is a quality that should never be lacking in Christian catechesis, and Sister Lucia's book is indeed highly exemplary in this regard. It gives even greater assurance of truth to the words and teachings so clearly contained in her precious book. Mary's commandment. In the book of the Seer of Fatima, there are numerous pages ardent with love for Our Lady. One could even say that the truest and most constant teaching contained in the book is that of Our Lady, who speaks and teaches through Sister Lucia. The characteristic of the Marian character contained in the book is that it is 1. Entirely relative to Christ, 2. Entirely referred to Christ, 3. Constantly directed towards and bound to Christ, the way, the truth, and the life. Saint Louis-Marie Grignon de Montfort said that it was easier to separate the light from the sun than to separate Mary from Christ. Sister Lucia, in her turn, confirms this inseparability between Christ and Mary, page after page, without any shadow of exaggeration, but with the most spontaneous naturalness of one who possesses and transmits the truth. And this is immediately evident above all when Sister Lucia summarizes the entire Marian message and teaching in the last words of Mary recorded by St. John in his Gospel, which for this reason they are of exceptional importance for us too. Quoting John chapter 2, verse 5, his mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." With this fitting gospel reference, Sister Lucia defines those last words as Mary's commandment, which translates into an obedience of faith and love, that is, into Our Lady's fiat voluntas tua, which she pronounced at the annunciation of the angel Gabriel, obeying that will of God, which made her the divine mother of the Redeemer and co-redemptrix of the whole of humanity. The Marian dimension of Sister Lucia's book, summarized in such an original and evocative way, reveals itself as fundamentally Christological in nature. It is therefore a Marian dimension in a Christological perspective that is active and operative in every Christian's life. Just as the servants at the wedding feast of Cana were active and operative in obeying Our Lady with their readiness to do what Jesus wanted, thus obtaining the wonderful miracle of water turned into wine. The co-redemptrix of the human race. Among the truths of the mystery of Our Lady that Sister Lucia presents with conviction in her book, we are also happily surprised to find a beautiful truth that shines with a special light because of the preciousness of the grace it brings with it and imparts to all of us. And this is the truth of Marian co-redemption. That is, the truth of faith, which is not yet defined but considered proxime definibilis, according to which Our Lady was willed by God as co-redemptrix of the human race, as universal co-redemptrix alongside her Son, Jesus, the perfect and absolute Redeemer. Sister Lucia, in her written catechesis, frequently pauses to reflect on the individual truths of the ineffable mystery of Mary, speaking when necessary of the divine motherhood, or the Immaculate Conception, of perpetual virginity, or of maternal mediation and the distribution of graces, of her assumption into heaven in soul and body, or of universal queenship, of devotion to the Immaculate Heart, or of the value of the Holy Rosary. Now, if all this can be considered necessary and obvious for a complete Marian catechesis, Nonetheless, one is surprised to find, sifting through the entire book of Sister Lucia, a notable presence of specific and explicit discourse on the truth of Marian co-redemption. In fact, 8 times Sister Lucia speaks of Our Lady as co-redemptrix, expressly and repeatedly calling her co-redemptrix. Knowing the state of affairs in today's Mariology, that is, the state of agitation of some Mariologists and theologians who would like to ostracize the theological term co-redemptrix, accusing it strangely, after centuries of orderly and perfect, peaceful use, of ambiguity and doctrinal danger, one cannot but welcome the discovery that Sister Lucia, contrary to these apprehensive Mariologists and theologians, Sister Lucia joins the great ranks of past and present defenders of Marian co-redemption. Sister Lucia, too, with a keen sensus fidei, calmly and routinely calls Our Lady co-redemptrix, and she can do so with good reason, since the fathers of the Second Vatican Council themselves, at the beginning of the Council, while preferring not to use the specific term during the ecumenical assemblies, out of a particular ecumenical consideration for the representatives of the Protestant churches at the Council, nevertheless did not fail to explicitly define as verissima, most true, the expression co-redemptrix of the human race, together with some other Marian expressions. Now, if during the Second Vatican Council, the precise expression co-redemptrix of the human race was defined as in se verissima, an absolute superlative, one wonders on the basis of what strange criterion or evaluation some people have come to define it as ambiguous, inaccurate, dangerous, and seeking to ostracize it precisely in the name of the Council. In detail, Sister Lucia uses the typical expression co-redemptrix of the human race 4 times. She uses the distinct expressions co-redemptrix of humanity, co-redemptrix of humanity with Christ, and co-redemptrix with Christ of humanity. Finally, twice more, in the context of a soteriological discourse, she speaks of Our Lady who shared with Jesus crucified, quote, as co-redemptrix in the atrocious suffering of his passion, end quote, and who had her own, her words, mission of co-redemptrix with Christ. The heart of the mother is the heart of the son. Redemption and co-redemption, the Eucharist and the Rosary. These are the 4 truths and supernatural realities of the mystery of Our Lady. However, if we had wanted to identify a point of light, a guiding principle in which is enclosed the whole Mariological discourse of Sister Lucia's wise catechesis, we could say it was the inestimable treasure of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Knowing full well that it constitutes the very heart of Fatima, the supernal reason for its history and its message. In addition to frequent references to the Immaculate Heart in Sister Lucia's book, we also find a short chapter which contains precisely what we are looking for, a point of reference and synthesis of the Fatima event. Sister Lucia articulates with her expansive spiritual affection what forms the heart of a mother. She says, it is love. It is genuine maternal love. That is the love that sacrifices itself for its children. This was especially true of Our Lady, already presented to us by God from the beginning, Genesis 3:15, as the most loving mother of her offspring, and who would be victorious over the serpent after the fall of our first parents. If it is true that every child receives everything from the heart of its mother, it receives their natural life, their life-giving blood, the beating of their heart, writes Sister Lucia, then we could almost say that the heart of the mother is the heart of the child. This is obviously true of Our Lady, and especially when she carried the Son of the Eternal Father in her womb, who was the all-virginal first fruit of her offspring. And from this virginal first fruit, the whole Church has been and continues to be nourished by the divine Eucharist. I am the bread of life. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood remains in me, and I in him. John 6:48. And to live thus because of Christ, Sister Lucia reflects, is also to live because of Mary, since Jesus had received his body and blood from Mary. Devotion to the heart of Mary, moreover, becoming consecrated to her, assimilates us to Our Lady. As in Eucharistic consecration, Sister Lucia explains, the bread and wine are converted into the body and blood of Christ. So, in Marian consecration, we are absorbed with our vital being in the heart of Mary. This analogy between the Eucharistic consecration and consecration to the Immaculate Heart of Mary is wonderful. The dynamics of supernatural grace is always transformative. The consecration to the Immaculate Heart assimilates us to her. It Marianizes us. And this Marianization unites us to Christ in inseparable love and suffering until we are Christified in the sign of the greatest love, sacrificial, immolating, and crucified love. Sister Lucia continues, hence Mary, made one with Christ, is the co-redemptrix of the human race. The inherent consequence is clear. The reason why Mary is the co-redemptrix of the human race is because she became one with Christ. Obviously, this was not a union on the level of mere feelings, but a union so radical and total as to make Our Lady one with Christ, in the totality and fullness of her soul, or else we could say one with Christ in nature and workings, in rejoicing and in pain, in loving and suffering for the redemptive mission to be accomplished. And all this from the virginal conception of Jesus to his crucifixion on Calvary, to the crowning of God's plan with the glory of the kingdom of heaven, where she sits at the Redeemer's right hand, eternally united with her divine Son. Now, at this point, it seems clear that the itinerary of the Rosary, or rather the theology of the Rosary, with its joyful mysteries of the Incarnation, the sorrowful mysteries of the Redemption, and the glorious mysteries of the glorification in the kingdom of heaven, constitutes the golden thread of the teaching of Sister Lucia of Fatima, a teaching that has soteriology at its center and heart, namely the redemption and co-redemption, inseparably united in symbiosis and synergy of saving grace for the whole human race. Signed, Father Stefano Maria Manelli.
Ave Maria. We thanks again Father Stefano Manelli. We send to him, our guardian angel, to reward for this work. Very, very important, very interesting. And we thanks also Father Anthony Maria for your excellent exposition. And the questions will be at the end of this morning session of studies. Now we have a little break until
we come back at 11 o'clock for
11 o'clock.
5 minutes past 11 start.
Thank you.
A reminder again, if you
Virgo Dei genitrix, quem